Welcome to a Modern Nonprofit podcast, powered by the Charity CFO, your compass for creative solutions in running your nonprofit. I'm Tosha Anderson, your host and guide through this nonprofit maze. From fundraising to volunteer management, we've got your back. Join us each episode for fresh, game-changing strategies that can make a real impact. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm Tosha Anderson, I'm your host, and I just want to thank you all for plugging in. It's kind of crazy. I was just talking with my new friend, Brandon Peacock. You are going to be my guest today. We're going to dive into the conversation. But before we do, I was just sharing with Brandon before I hit record how successful this podcast has become. And it's quite surprising to me. We have like over 40,000 people that listen to this podcast, which is mind blowing because I never started this podcast with a dream of being a podcast person, an influencer of some way. And I just want to thank you all for spending your time listening to this. And those of you that subscribe, like, or engage in any way, that's how we've spread the word. People just interact with us in some way, and that allows other nonprofit leaders like you to find this content. So I just wanted to share that little story and show a little bit of gratitude. So we'll move on though to our actual conversation. Brandon, you are a nonprofit founder, and I love talking to other founders. And we don't always have a lot of nonprofit founders on because there's just so many. How do you choose? But I thought your story was really, really interesting. Brandon, the organization that you founded is Hit the Ground Running. So this is an organization dedicated to supporting trauma survivors. And I love talking about this because we talk about the word trauma a lot in the nonprofit world, right? I've had episodes of like secondary trauma working with the clients that we work with. But I think something else that we don't often talk about is the fact that so many people that I've met in the nonprofit space, hate to make overgeneralizations, but I've talked to so many people that have their own stories that influenced them in some way and in such a way that they felt compelled to kind of enter the nonprofit industry professionally. So I'm excited to talk to you about your traumatic experience, what led you to start your organization, and then how that experience has maybe influenced how you run your organization or how you interact with the people that benefit from your program, and then how you balance kind of this your own experiences in a way that works for you, but also not so triggering maybe when you're working with other trauma survivors. So first, thank you for coming on and sharing this story with us and being vulnerable and talking about trauma, which is not really an easy topic or a light topic.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's definitely a unique one, but I've really just tried to figure out things based on my unique experiences, right? I'm by no means an expert in the space. I don't have an MD. I don't have any, doctorates, PhDs, whatever. I'm just a guy who's lived it and been fortunate to really come through it and
Yeah.
be able to make an impact in the lives of some of the kids that I've helped along the way.
I mean, and that's really what I find in the nonprofit world. I mean, it's just a big group of well-meaning people that probably have a story of their own that are trying to use their own experiences to really influence the work we're doing. And at least from my perspective as the accountant in the room that's trying to help navigate the compliance, it's like nerve-wracking. It's like, I'm just trying to do this like thing from my own experience. Like I know it's right. And then we have this web of complexity and just everything that makes things difficult. So, sometimes it's a shame we just can't keep it simple like that. But so let's kind of start from the beginning. Let's just open it up. Let's talk about your experience in the events in June of 2020 that kind of started this whole ripple effect for you. Tell us about your story. What happened? Share that story with me. I don't want to
Yeah,
give too
of
much
course.
away. This is your
No,
story.
that's okay. That's okay. So in June 2020, I was actually working as a corporate consultant. At the time, I just graduated university. My whole childhood was kind of building up to those moments, right? I initially planned on going into the field of business law, worked at the
Mm-hmm.
Supreme Court of Canada for a while. For everyone tuning in, I'm Canadian. So that was a pretty big accomplishment. I entered
Mm-hmm.
the workforce into the corporate consulting space. So not for profit was never something I anticipated going
Right.
into. And then in June 2020, as Canada was under lockdown, basically due to COVID, we had a 1 week window where the barber shops and, kind of essential services opened up. And
Mm.
I decided to go get a haircut so I'd look good for my corporate Zoom calls.
Yeah.
And 5:45 p.m., I walk into my barber shop and I get caught in the middle of a drive-by shooting.
Oh
So
my God.
as I'm walking up to the door, Two cars pull up, guys jump out of both of the cars and start opening fire on the shop. At the time, there was a woman who was holding the door open for me because her husband is the owner of the shop and they don't want people touching the door handle because of COVID and germs and that sort of stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
the target of the shooting was a man who was sitting on a bench outside the attached building. He ran into the door that was being held open for me. And I was lucky enough to hesitate and let the woman who was holding the door open for me kind of get in front of me. And then I launched the two of us into the shop. And unfortunately, I was caught in the back of the line. So I took three bullets. One of the
Mm,
bullets hit me. It's hard to see, but it's at the top left of my collarbone. It
mm.
actually came in the bottom left of my collarbone, sorry, of my shoulder, and came out the top left of my collarbone. So it
Wow.
broke a bunch of my ribs, but it missed my heart and my lungs, which was just
Thank goodness.
incredibly fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
The second bullet hit me in the left knee, and it was a ricochet bullet, so it really didn't do too much damage. I'd equate it to being like a really, really, really bad paper cut. And then the third bullet severed my femoral arteries. So that was
Ooh.
far and away the worst, like one of the worst places you could get hit with a bullet, right? So you bleed out so quickly from an injury like that. You're actually more likely to survive taking a bullet to the head than you would be taking a bullet to the artery there.
Wow.
Um, Now, the quality of life you have if you survive is going to be incredibly different, for a bullet to the head to the artery, right? So I'm not saying I would prefer that, but
Right.
you're just so
Survival
likely
wise, yeah.
that's it. It's really it's a kill shot in many cases, right? Where I was very
Mm,
fortunate is there was a police officer nearby. He was on scene in 4 minutes, got a tourniquet immediately on my leg, and saved my life. Basically, gave me a chance to
mm.
make it to the hospital that night. When I arrived at the hospital, they cleared out a full floor for me. I was at a level one trauma center. Very fortunately, that was about 15 minutes from where I was shot here in
Mm-hmm.
Canada's capital where I live. I went into surgery that night with a 50-50 chance to survive, basically,
Wow.
because of the extent of my injuries. And they told my parents there was about a 10 to 15% chance I'd keep my right leg.
Mm,
Um, Very, very fortunately, I obviously stayed alive, kept my right leg, and lived to fight another day. And pretty early on into that recovery journey, I'd say within my first week in the hospital, I knew I wanted to do something with my story, and I knew I had an opportunity, I think, to do something incredible, which,
mm-hmm.
you're looking for a way to process that new trauma and new
Mm-hmm.
alteration, I guess, to your state of living, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
immediately I was thinking, how can I turn this into the positive, right? And at the time, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know I wanted to start a charity. I didn't know
Right.
how I was going to do it. But I kind of started brainstorming ideas and thinking about avenues I could take to turn this into a positive instead
Mm-hmm.
of just kind of sitting there and self victimizing in the hospital. And I think that was really a big part of what allowed me to kind of get through and move forward. So yeah, that's like the origin of everything. It was certainly not an easy year after that,
Mm-hmm.
but it was probably the most fun year of my life, which sounds really weird to a lot of people, but there was a lot. Like there was a lot after that that I'm very very blessed and fortunate to have had happen to me.
So there must have been a tremendous toll, like emotionally, mentally, when you're recovering from an injury like that. I would imagine, and it's in those moments I find that people that are victims of something or suffering from something starts to realize there has to be a better way to go through this, or there needs to be more support, or there needs to be something, and that's usually how these kind of ideas generate for people that I think decide to go and start, some sort of mission or a nonprofit or whatever it might be to help solve that. What were some of the things that you kind of uncovered during this whole healing process? I'm sure it wasn't like, oh, like an outpatient surgery in 2 days, you're released. I'm sure you were there. And walk us through some of the steps of your journey there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things. I think the first biggest thing that I uncovered from this entire situation was I got to learn my dying thoughts as a 23 year
Mm,
old, right? So all of this happened when I was 23 years old, still coming into my young adulthood, I guess you could say.
hmm
And as I was laying on that floor bleeding out, not knowing if I was going to make it to the next day,
mm,
the first thing I did was call my mom. So I called my mom, the only phone number I know off heart, and
hmm
just let her know, I'd been shot, like not to worry that I was going to be okay. And I just wanted her to hear it from me. And
hmm
at the time, it was funny because, I was a little more concerned about the bullet to my chest than my leg,
Sure.
if I'm being honest.
You're like, I'm still
um,
breathing. I'm here. I'm
that's
awake.
it.
I
Well,
must be
and you
fine.
look
Yeah.
down and you're like, okay, well, like my heart's there, the bullet hole is here. That can't be a good sign, right?
Right.
But so anyways, I call my mom, I let her know that I'm going to be okay, not to worry about me. And at that moment, I genuinely believed it, right? It wasn't just me being
Hmm.
optimistic. It wasn't me trying to, reassure her of things. It was just me being so confident in my ability to fight that I was going to find a way to make it through. But I was lying on the ground, bleeding out and being transported to the hospital. You start to reflect on life, right? Because you do
Hmm.
know there's a reality that exists that you don't survive and don't wake up that next morning, right? And
Yeah.
in those moments when I was thinking about the legacy that I left behind, I wasn't really proud of what it would have been, right? And at the
Mm.
time, I had a lot of good things going for me. I had a good corporate job, I had a good circle of friends, I'd impacted the people around me in a positive way, but I didn't feel like if my friends were speaking at my funeral, I'd be 100% proud of the legacy that I left behind,
Mm.
right? And that kind
Hmm.
of in those moments, I realized that there was going to need to be more to my life when I woke up that next morning, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
So that was really the first big thing that helped, reshape the way that I look at the world, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Sure.
Um, and then after that, it sounds so weird to say, but like I said before, the first year after being shot was the best year of my life. And I just learned so much
Mm.
about myself, right? I no longer really cared about my job, for example. As soon as I got out of the
Hmm.
hospital, I just got to work. My best friend happened to be a physiotherapist. So like, I was the best candidate to have to get shot. If somebody had to get shot as a
Hmm.
bystander, I'm really happy it was me. My
Yes.
best friend was a physiotherapist who wasn't working at the time because COVID had closed the
Oh,
clinics.
wow.
And he was waiting to get his national licensing exam because he'd also taken because he'd recently graduated from university as well to practice as a physiotherapist, but he couldn't practice in clinic because of the certification in the clinic closures,
Right.
right? So he loved me like a brother. We were very close, and we worked out 5 hours a day, 7 days a week for
Wow.
months together. We just did not stop training. And I went from being told by my doctors I'd probably never walk normally again, and just to be
Mm.
fortunate to be alive, to running my first full marathon 13 months later, right?
Wow.
And that was really just a testament to, I think, what the human body and spirit is capable of when you have the right tools around you for recovery, you have the right mindset, and you have the right, motivation and I think drive.
Hmm.
And that right there, it's translated to every other aspect of my life 4 or 5 years later now, right? Like, I
Hmm.
am so much more confident in my ability to execute and do the things that need to get done because I've been able to do the things I think that people wrote me
We're
off for. People
impossible.
told me I
Yeah.
would never be able to do, right? So
Hmm.
that year was the most fun year of my life because all I did was defy expectations.
Hmm.
In terms of steps like physiotherapy, I was walking after like 3 weeks after everything, and I was told that that was going to be an 8 week process, right?
Hmm.
I ran my first 5K 3 months later. I was told that I would be
Wow.
lucky to do that within the year, if ever again, right? I was
Hmm.
skating normally, like on the ice. I'm Canadian, right? So I was
Hmm.
playing hockey 3 months after everything and had returned to pretty good health. And I remember even months in, I did what's called an EMG test. So they test
Hmm.
the nerve functionality, I guess, in your leg. In my case, in my leg. And my EMG doctor told me that there was no way I could run a marathon. This was 8 months into my recovery. But that
Hmm.
same morning, I ran my first half marathon, right? I just lined it
Mm.
up because I just knew it was going to be funny because I knew he was
You're
going to
like,
tell me I
challenge
couldn't. So,
accepted. Challenge
yeah.
accepted.
So I think the biggest thing for me that I learned from all of this was what we're capable of, right? And I see
Mm.
it every day in the kids that I work with is sometimes you just need to set unrealistic expectations, chase
Hmm.
them, and you might not reach all of them, but you're going to be
Right.
really happy with the person that you become along the way, right? And I was forced to do that because of my unique recovery situation, but so many people could benefit from having that perspective in their day-to-day life in general. So those were really the biggest takeaways I had, but I loved it. I had a lot of fun with it. I liked when people wrote me off.
Right? Challenge accepted. It sounds like you're kind of competitive in that way. So, some sort of athlete that
Yes.
wants to push yourself. Somebody once said to me, create these crazy stretch goals because even if you miss it by 20%, you're still far better than farther along in a much better position and a lot of personal and professional growth along the way. You're in such a better position than you were if you didn't do anything at all. Even if you failed because you didn't meet the actual goal, you still are leaps and bounds where you would have been. So tell me from like that point, I mean, you kind of talked a little bit about, your recovery and you were back to physical health and what an incredible blessing with the support system that you had. And very coincidental, like you said, that of all people, thankfully I had this, support. But tell us how long it took you between kind of that incident to deciding to start hit the ground running.
Yeah, I'd say it took me let's somewhere between 6 and 8 months, and the
Okay.
idea was maybe in the works a little bit before that. But like I said at the start, I knew there was some sort of impact I wanted to make on the world because of the story that I'd been given, right?
Hmm.
And I think step one in that long-term plan was doing something incredible enough to, make my story a positive one, right? Instead of just me being the victim of a shooting, it was I was shot and then I ran this marathon, right? So once we
Mm-hmm.
started getting into the deeper ends of training, I realized, okay, we're going to document this process. We have this wonderful opportunity to try to fundraise for something on top of telling this story. Where
Mm-hmm.
should we direct those efforts, right? And I very, very, very easily realized that the biggest game changer in my recovery was my friend Frank, right? Was my
Mm-hmm.
physiotherapist who was there along my side. And it got me
Mm-hmm.
thinking, insurance declined my claim 4 times after I'd been
Wow.
shot with a full police report, with everything. I had great insurance and they just fought me tooth and nail for everything. Once they
Mm-hmm.
finally accepted my claim 2 months, 2.5 months into my recovery, which is really important time when you have 12 months to regain most of your neural
Yeah.
function, right?
Right.
2.5 months in, they finally accepted me. They gave me 2 physiotherapy sessions a week for, I believe, 12 weeks. And then the expectation was that I would be back to work.
Right.
And because I could sit down at a desk and I could make sales calls, right? And they didn't really care about my long term health as a
Right.
23-year-old who'd been through this, right? They just cared,
Mm-hmm.
can Brandon get back to work? How do we get him back to work as quickly as possible, right? Which is their
Mm-hmm.
prerogative. They have shareholders that they have to,
Right.
support, but that's where their obligation lies. But I realized there was a massive gap, right? And even in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
where the healthcare is supposedly free, we have a really, really, really low quality rehabilitative care system.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at it and I saw the biggest correlation with my rehabilitation going well was my access to therapy,
Right.
physiotherapy, and psychotherapy both. How do I give other kids the same opportunity that I had, right?
Sure.
And we decided to create Hit the Ground Running to support those individuals in giving them the same access to a fighting chance that I had because I saw what I was capable
Mm-hmm.
of, right? And my thought process was, I'm not the anomaly. I'm just the guy who had the chance, right? So many
Right.
people could recover the same way that I did if they had those resources. And I've seen it
Right.
now,
Right.
right? Like that first
Mm-hmm.
kid. So when we ran that first marathon, we fundraised for what ended up being a young man named Ethan. He's in the city that I live in. He was also shot as a bystander, very similar story to mine.
Mm.
And same sort of thing. He got shot. It nicked his artery, so it didn't fully sever the artery, similar to mine. It was a little
Yeah.
bit less of a problem, but still bad
Yeah.
because of all the nerve damage. And I was able to kind of one-on-one mentor him, bring him to my same physiotherapist, cover those bills, and then we watched him go from this kid who was struggling with just walking to now squatting over 300 pounds 2 years
Wow.
later, right? Like he's fully recovered. So I just identified a gap that people didn't know existed because they think that there is
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be systems in place to support these sort of individuals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I figured, if there's a way that I can help kids like me, that would be the biggest blessing I could ask for when it comes to having to go through the shooting, right?
Yeah.
Circle back to my dying thoughts. If I was to die tomorrow, if I was back on that barbershop floor bleeding out and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't make
Mm-hmm.
it, I'd be proud of the legacy that I've left behind, and I'd be happy,
Mm-hmm.
about what my friends and family would say about me at my funeral, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that really is what inspired Hit the Ground Running, and has allowed it to flourish, I think.
Yeah. Well, what an interesting story and what an interesting concept too. I mean, I'm a CPA by training, not in the medical field, but it's interesting that you share your experience of recovery, and the particular services that your organization offers, because I've worked with so many different organizations that support victims in a variety of different ways, right? And a lot of times I have a client, for example, that helps victims of crime, and usually it's like filling in the gap of whatever it might be, right? Transportation if their car got stolen, or maybe some support on paying, their utilities while they're out of work, or something, just something to kind of close that gap a little bit to make life a little bit more digestible in that moment, or I guess, if for lack of a better word. But it's interesting the work that you're talking about, because recently not because of a crime like you experienced, but something else. Even the United States rehabilitative work is just, and I'm no medical person, but it's mind-blowing to me, the low level of services that are offered through insurance or other means. I have a friend who's battling a chronic illness, and her mobility is really impacted. And it's like, oh, you get like 10 sessions of physical therapy a year. It's like she needs to be going to physical therapy every day to build strength, or to maintain the muscle mass and the strength. And it's just like mind blowing to me that something like working with, a therapist on your physical strength, it sounds so just, I don't know the right even words, because it's late in the week and it's late in the day, but yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for words. But it just seems like such a reasonable request to get something like that, and to realize what a profound impact it will have on your long-term health, your long-term sustainability. Like you said, if it's just simply, let's patch you back up and get you to where you're presenting like you're back to your normal self, even though long-term you're never going to be able to recover your strength or mobility without really significant intervention. And I could see, even in this country, you said you're in Canada, for those that are listening, even in this country, we certainly have a huge gap there. So kudos to you for the work that you're doing, and to support the survivors of something like this in a way that clearly there's a gap in probably medical systems across the world, frankly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was going to say, I work with some survivors in the States too. So it's not just Canada. I've
Yeah,
seen both systems, and there's a glaring gap. And to me, it makes me
both.
sound like a conspiracy theorist saying it, but like I think that there is so much power in the industries of pain management versus, pain reduction, right? So when I work with physiotherapists, I'm really, really, really particular with who I will send the people we're supporting to, even
Hmm.
if we have to pay a premium for it, right? Because I've
Right.
seen, just for perspective, the insurance that my insurance provider covered physiotherapy sessions. They were very low quality. I didn't make a lot
Hmm.
of progress. And again, I understand their fiduciary responsibility is to their shareholder, right? Like that
Right.
is who they are supporting at the end of the day. Their goal is to make my treatment as cost effective as possible, right?
Hmm.
Whereas my entire premise is, if I can only help 2 or 3 kids this year, but I can actually change their life and get them into 5 quality sessions of physiotherapy every week, that is more impactful for me than kind of helping more people, right?
Right.
So the quality of care is
Quality over
necessary.
quantity. Hmm.
Yeah, well, and I also think it takes off a lot of the long-term burden, like you said, right? If we have people who are able to recover well, they're able to get off of these pain management
Hmm.
medications, they're able to start to reset their life, they become less of a burden on the health system long term,
Right.
right? So
Right.
it's interesting, and especially for the younger generations like me. If you look at that, for example, another interesting story is I opted out of pain medication on day 2 in the hospital, and
Wow.
it was really tough. Like I didn't sleep for probably 3 weeks. More like I
Mm.
slept 3 hours a night or less for 3 weeks straight. I was 45 pounds down. My body, I had
Wow.
120 sutures. I was toast.
Clearly in shock. Yeah.
Yeah,
Your
but
body
I was
was.
able to
Yeah.
think, yeah, 100%. But I was able to think clearly, and I was able to start the process really quickly on, right? And I think
Hmm.
that for me, that pain was easy enough. Like I could accept the pain because I was starting to make progress, because I had hope that I was able to get to that next level. Whereas a lot of people, it's just easier to numb, I think, themselves when they're experiencing that sort of pain, because they feel hopeless, right? They're scared and they don't
Hmm.
want to have to confront those emotional kind of responses to everything, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm really fortunate to be able to do the work that I do, and it's a lot of fun for me to see the progress that people I'm able to impact are making, because of what we do.
That's such a cool story. If I can, Brandon, I want to shift like just a little
Yeah,
bit, because I think this is something that a lot of leaders of nonprofits, especially founders, struggle with. You have a story that obviously influenced you to, hit the ground running. And, through your work, sometimes it's challenging your own mental health and well-being with also the clients that you're working. I mean, it's almost like re-traumatizing, I would guess, if you're not really careful. So I'm curious, like, what do you do to take care of yourself to make sure that the work is sustainable for you, because it's not just continuing to like re-traumatize you through your own experiences? Or like, how did you work through that, or how do you continue to take care of yourself? Because I think there's a lot of people that can relate to that.
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to think of a good answer, because it could be challenging just like everything else. But for me, I really, really, really focused on, the psychological recovery from my injury very
Mm-hmm.
intensely, as soon as I possibly could. So
Mm,
if you look at PTSD, which I was impacted by really bad the first few months after the shooting, I was
mm-hmm.
able to get a pretty good grip on it early on. So what I
Mm.
started doing, and again, this is like not medical advice, it's just my unique experience.
Disclaimer.
But yeah, like please don't come after me. Like people hate it. Sometimes people love it, but I dove really heavy into what's called exposure therapies. So
Mm,
for example, about a month and a half after the shooting, 2 months after, I started reintegrating into the world, right? And
mm,
I started going to the public gym. I started going out for dinners with my friends. I started just going
mm.
to the grocery store again, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
And it was really challenging for me for two reasons. One, everybody was wearing masks at the time. Everybody was already a little hyper, anxious because of COVID.
Sure. Sure.
And now I couldn't see anybody. I didn't know what was going on. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking,
Are
where
they
are
a
the people who
threat?
shot me and do they want to finish
Mm,
me off? So I was
hmm.
constantly in this state of fight or flight. And there was one day when I was at the public gym, I basically just broke down. I had a full fledged
Hmm.
panic attack. I looked around. I was like, that guy's going to kill me. I looked to my right. I'm like, the guy on the bike beside me is going to kill me. And it's like a
Hmm.
65-year-old man and, like a young
Right.
woman. They were probably not the
Low
demographic of
threats.
individuals
Yeah.
who were going to kill me.
Right.
But because my brain had just been re-altered and my nervous system had kind of been reset, I was just
Hmm.
constantly afraid of everything. Right. And I realized that that wasn't going to be a sustainable way for me to live my life and to make the impact that I wanted to make on the world. So I
Mm,
really started reading intently. I started listening to a ton of podcasts. And
mm.
what I ended up learning about was exposure therapy. And where I went with this was probably a little bit extreme. And again, I don't recommend it to
You seem
everybody,
like an
but
extreme
for me, it
guy.
worked.
You
Yeah.
seem like an
Well,
extreme guy. So this might be on brand, but I want to hear it.
yeah, well, what I started doing when I started to rehabilitate a little bit better is I started going for these like walk, run, 5K jogs at
Hmm.
3 a.m. in the sketchiest area of my city. So
Oh my
my
God, you
logic
are
was
extreme.
if I'm,
Yes.
yeah, my logic was like if I'm gonna get killed, I'm gonna get killed here, right? And it
Mm,
sounds so crazy to say, but in my mind, at
interesting.
all points, I was under threat, right? I could be at a mommy and me class and I was still afraid of everyone in there. You know what I mean? Like I
Hmm.
everywhere I was afraid, and it was just such a terrible way to live that I needed to retrain my brain, right? And I thought,
Mm,
what is the thing that I could do that will retrain it as effectively as possible? So
mm,
I put myself in that situation, and the first few times I was scared to death. I was horrified.
mm,
But by time like 6 and 7 and 8 of being out there in the middle of the night, I realized not one person has interacted with me. I don't even know if anybody's looked at me.
right. No
Nobody
one cares about
cares.
you.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like I'm fine. Like I'm in my own head here. And that
Mm,
was really how I kind of started to navigate my PTSD and really overcome a lot of the psychological trauma. And then the second piece of that is I was able to find positive purpose and impact through my story, right? Like the
mm,
shooting isn't something I look back on as a negative and something that altered my life in a bad, like in a poor way,
mm,
because I physically rehabilitated as good as I possibly could, right? I'm in better
right.
shape now than I was before I got shot. I've run multiple marathons. I'm training for an Ironman. Like I'm healthy. So that's not a
Hmm.
point for the shooters. That's a point for me. I've been able to help all these kids who otherwise wouldn't have had the support necessary to recover from their injuries. That's a
Mm,
point for me. I'm very proud of the fact I've been able to do that, right? Mentally, I'm more resilient than I ever was before the shooting. That's a point
sure.
for me. Like all of these things have gone in my favor over like just consistent work,
Mm,
accountability, and growth. So when I work with the individuals like Gavin or Isaiah or the kids that I work with on a day-to-day basis, I've been able to be a strong leader for them. And it hasn't really, it's not about me and my situation anymore, if that makes sense. So even when the traumatic
hmm.
kind of pieces come up, I look at it as such a positive. Like I genuinely just think it was such a good thing to happen to me that I try
Mm-hmm.
to, use that positivity to influence them into the direction that I know they need to go, right? And as I
Mm.
see them starting to make growth, even if they, have setbacks, even if they have hurdles, I've watched them become these like strong, independent leaders in their own right through their own recovery journeys, even if they haven't had the same level of recovery that I've
Mm-hmm.
had, right? And
Wow.
for me, I could sit back and, I could sit back and stress about the things that have happened to me. And there was certainly some lows, and there's always going to be hard things in my life that I need to manage, right? Just like everybody, it's stressful to run
Mm-hmm.
your own business, as I'm sure that you've seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
not an easy journey, but at the end of the day, I know that because of everything that I've been through, I've been able to make the world a better place than, I would have otherwise, if I was gone, right? And
Yeah.
with that in mind, I'm able to manage it pretty well, even on the
Mm.
low days. I think on the low
Yeah.
days I actually feel my best. It's the
Mm.
days I should be feeling really good that I'm kind of like, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
I like the challenges. I like the hurdles. I like having to help people because it's the person I've been able to become over the last couple of years. So I don't know if that's like the best answer, but that's just
That's an
unique to
interesting
me how I've been
answer.
able to cope.
That's an interesting. Didn't think you were going to say that. It's like, well, I was a victim of a violent crime, and I'm just going to go into, historically the most violent areas of the city, and I'm just going to hang out
Well, it's
there.
funny.
And if
I've
I didn't
talked to
expect you to say
people.
that. Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really unique too to my situation is I've talked to like the cousins of the people who've shot me. I've talked to
Mm,
a very significant amount of people who are involved in organized like gangs and that community of gun violence now because of the
yeah.
social media traction that I've been able to get. And it's very strange. It's opened my eyes, I think, to a new level of existence that I otherwise would have never thought of. Right. So I've
Yeah.
spoken to, let's say, like Bloods in California and had the
Mm,
opportunity to kind of listen to them, hear their stories, and hear that they're just regular people like me and you who've been
mm-hmm.
through different life experiences, right? I've kind of generated a different level of empathy than I might not have
Right.
ever had before, and that kind of also takes away from the trauma of my situation a little bit too because I've humanized what a lot
Right.
of people would view as the opponent, right? So
Mm-hmm. Or
there's a ton of
depersonalized it. It's not this
yeah.
wasn't a situation
Well,
specifically
it's
targeted as you already know, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and what's really funny is I so just by chance, one of my good friends is like very close friends with the cousin of one of the people who shot me, and
Mm,
he sent me a voice message one night, basically saying like, "We're so sorry you got caught up in this. Just so you know, like we all follow along with what you're doing. We love it. We're some of
mm-hmm.
your biggest fans." And it's
Mm-hmm.
talk about putting your brain into a blender a little bit. At that time, I didn't
Wow.
know what to think, right?
Yeah,
But now that
like
I've kind of processed it
yeah.
and moved forward, I'm like these people are all humans too, right? Like I was
Mm-hmm.
just caught up in this really weird place, and if I sat back and allowed my life to be this incredible gift of life and second
Mm-hmm.
chance and rebirth that I've had to be ruined because of vengeance or any of those sorts of things, or maybe self pity, I think I'd be doing a disservice to the people that I could actually positively impact with my time here. So yeah, it's probably very unique. I know it's probably not the
I love
most like
that.
common answer in the space, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's
No, I
changed me
appreciate
for
that.
positive
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Such a wild card answer. I wasn't expecting that, but I love that. So let me ask you one more question, because we're running out of time. And let me try to formulate the question because it's getting me to think about this a little bit. There's so many people that are inspired again because of their own stories, and they want to go in and they want to, have the desire to change the world or like fill in the gap or whatever it might be. And then they start this path, right? And you had mentioned earlier a little bit of it's not always easy, and like starting and running a business is not easy. So like what is like the number one thing that was like most surprising to you from this like vision dream, sitting in the hospital, sitting in therapy, like I want to have this impact, to actually now sitting in the seat of, somebody running an organization and dealing with the actual business side? What is like the biggest thing that you weren't expecting?
The biggest thing that I wasn't expecting. It's a hard question because I didn't expect I think any of this to
And yeah,
happen.
right, all of the above.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I, running a charity is hard. I think as you've probably seen with a lot of people in your
Yes.
network, and it's maybe a bit of a cop out answer, and I love the work that I do. So if I
Hmm.
have to work long days to do it, if I have to go overboard, if I have to cut my cost and my expenses
Hmm.
all over the place to live on the cheap so I can help the individuals that I help, and do all of that stuff, I will do it, right? I will
Yeah.
self-sacrifice now to help the individuals that I'm able to impact. And because of that, we've been able to grow, right? And
Hmm.
a lot of it is tough on the individual who's operating it, right? So I think the hardest, the biggest thing I think for me is that if I didn't start this charity, I'd probably be still on the corporate ladder. I'd probably be making a lot more money than I otherwise
Hmm.
am right now. I would have been in a different place, but you
Hmm.
have to really, really, really love the work that you're doing and the impact that you make. And
Hmm.
there's different ways that you can, grow that skill set, right? So one of the things that I've been able to do with running my charity that I never would have anticipated is we've probably generated over 40 million views on social. We've done really
Hmm.
well in the social world, and like I never saw myself as a social media guy. I actually like
Right.
hate like social, like similar to kind of you. Like I have this
Hmm.
podcast and I've been able to make this impact, and I love the impact I'm able to make. But
Right.
it's so not the place I
It's
was
so
anticipating
me.
with my life.
It's so me.
I feel
I'll
the same
stand up
way.
on this stage and do the things because I love the impact, but I'm not naturally like it's not my jam. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the same thing for me. Like I've had probably over at least over 30 million unique impressions, right? Of people who've seen
Hmm.
my face, listened to the work that we're doing, and in
Hmm.
some way been inspired or impressed or wanted to be a part of it. And for me, that's so strange to think about, right? Because to me, I'm
Hmm.
just doing the thing that I should be doing after going through what I went through, right?
Right.
As you know, not everybody thinks like that, but it really is that simple to me. It's go through
Hmm.
bad things, come out and do good things. Like
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
it's such a simple equation. So initially, that was really strange to me, and it's not that it's been a challenge. It's actually been a big blessing in my life, and I've spent a lot of time learning about the social strategy side of things. It's really
Hmm.
where our organization thrives, right? Like we've had thousands of unique independent donors,
Hmm.
which I think is very different than a lot of startup charities that are probably going after
Hmm.
grants and those other levels of funding. Like we haven't had any of that, and I actively like don't want to do that because it
Right.
changes the ability we're able to impact our like community, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I think I never anticipated that to happen. It's been a positive. The administrative side is a little bit more challenging for me. I think as somebody who is
Hmm.
in love with the impact piece, the back end
Right.
stuff is a little bit tedious for me.
It's
I'm maybe a
hard.
little bit of
Hmm.
a golden retriever, I think, where
Yeah.
I'm all over the place. But if you put me in front of a computer and you say, fix the books or do any of this stuff, it's a
Mhm.
little hard for me.
Yeah.
But I love it, and I think the biggest piece of advice I could give to anybody who's got a unique story and wants to make an impact is really sit down and think about the level of commitment you're willing to take on. Because there is also a lot of incredible organizations you can volunteer for and support. There
Hmm.
is a ton of positive impact you can make without taking on all the responsibilities of starting an organization that might further lead you to resenting it down the road, right? I've seen a lot of
Yes.
people who've gone down that path
Yes.
as well, where it takes over your life. It's fully consuming. It's really hard. You have
Right.
to be committed and willing to self sacrifice in other areas of your life um, to do that. So, yeah, I hope that's a good answer. And also, I guess
No,
if there's one
it's
more thing I could
yes.
say,
Please.
try to find something like if you're running a not for profit, try to really hone in on one skill if you're starting it up so you can become an
Mm.
expert in that space because it allows you
Mm.
to still find competitive growth in your career, right? So for me, because I've become so successful with the social media side and I understand it so well, now on top of running the charity, I consult not for profits on social strategy and
Mm.
scripting and all of that stuff. So I have a skill that I can monetize effectively now, pay myself what I probably would be making on the open
Love
market
that.
through that level of, impact, and then still spend, 10 hours a day running the thing that I love, right? So
Yeah.
that's been a big thing for me as well is really honing in and using the charity as something that has enhanced my like professional development still without
Mm.
being a full net negative. But it's hard, it really people don't anticipate how hard it is until they get there and they realize it's tough.
Yes. Well, I thought you might say something along those lines, but what great advice you offer. Just really great advice. Through my work, as you know, I work essentially as the accounting back office for nonprofits. And I started this firm because of all the things that you just described. I work with so many really cool founders. They have a really great mission. And then when they step into actually running the business and the administrative side, That's not why they started it. That's not why anybody starts a business, right? And then it becomes deeply overwhelming in a way that really tends to burn people out in some ways. So I suspected you might say that, but I really loved your idea of continuing to like hone in on a very specific skill and make that another professional development opportunity that if you ended up going into a different direction. And I think that the one last thing I'll leave with, that I tend to find that when you're a founder of a nonprofit, because a lot of times it may be impacted by your story or someone in your life story, right? Or something you're super passionate about, your life and your work tend to blend. There's really no there's no like work-life balance. There's no leave work. It becomes your all-consuming life. And so when you said it's a big commitment, for me, it's like, are you willing to make this thing become your life? Because that is what I've seen, essentially every founder that I've ever met, until which point they're able to maybe pass the torch on to their first, non-founder executive director, and then they move more into kind of an advisory role or something like that. But if you're kind of the active managing director, like executive director, founder, your life and your work it's one. It's one.
Yeah.
So it's a big commitment.
Well, I was going to say too, and I think one of the things that I've really learned over the last couple of years, and we've been able to fundraise a pretty good amount of money for just being like a really social media based like
Mm-hmm.
mission. The biggest thing I've learned is you also need to set yourself up with realistic expectations, right? So
Mm,
I could just try to find every grant funder out there, share, like we've got the operating budget now that we
mm-hmm.
could probably bring in some larger grants and do all of this stuff and grow that to the next level and the next level and the next level,
Sure.
but it's going to make it unsustainable for me to kind of continue to run the organization in the
Mm,
way that I want to, right? Like we were talking
mm.
about before, when you're seeking these higher levels of funding, you do need to kind of change
Your model a little bit.
your model a little bit, right? So
Mm-hmm.
just for
Mm-hmm.
perspective, if I wanted to go out and seek a ton of funding for a mentorship program, let's say, where we impact a ton of people, they I could get funding for it because the biggest goal there is how many heads can you possibly
Mm-hmm.
impact, right? But if I start to focus my attention in those spaces, I'll be creating a lower level of impact for the one, two, three individuals we help every month, because I won't be able to repurpose those funds to their
Yeah,
physiotherapy budgets and that sort of
sure.
stuff, right? So if instead I allocate as much time as I can to creating social campaigns and doing these things that I do already effectively, and I've now systemized where I could do them a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
quicker and let more time effective, I can
Yeah.
continue to make the impact that I really care about without necessarily bootstrapping. I think
Mm-hmm.
what the other work that I want to do, or sorry, like negatively impacting, I guess, the overall mission that we started out with. So
Makes
for
sense.
some people in the not-for-profit space, there's a ceiling you probably want to stay under, right? That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
the model that we
Mm-hmm.
have, and it
Mm-hmm.
allows me to kind of take other timing, other percentage, other percentages of my time or portions of my time to do consulting for not-for-profits, to do these
Mm-hmm.
other things effectively. So I don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it does.
just
It
be
does.
realistic, I think, with your expectations as well,
Mm-hmm.
because that's something that I don't always see. I think sometimes people try to like overcomplicate everything to get as much
Yeah.
money in as they possibly
Go too
can.
far too
And
fast. Yeah.
that's it, and it's just going to hurt you in the long term. I've seen it from a lot of people who I've looked at in my circles who are exceptional talents, but it's hurt them more than it's helped them for
Yeah.
sure.
Hurt them and their teams and their board. Maybe,
And the people
you
they
just
want to
get fatigue.
impact, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So, Brandon, this has been such a cool story. Thank you for sharing with us. If people want to follow along, you mentioned that you're really active on social media. What is the best way to just follow along with your story, or hit the ground running? Or where's the best way to kind of keep tabs on what you all are doing?
Yeah. Yeah, so our website for the charity is www.htgrcharity.com.
Okay.
So like hit the ground running charity.com.
Okay.
And that's where you can find any sort of information about what we're doing, the patient stories that we've worked with recently, our unique fundraising campaigns. We are tax deductible in Canada and the United States. So anybody there who wants to make a donation, you
Yes.
can. You write it off. It's great. And then for social media, on TikTok and Instagram, those are the two platforms I primarily use. My tag is Peacock, like the bird underscore Brandon. So Peacock underscore Brandon.
Okay.
And yeah, I go through, I think, spouts where I'm really active and then I'm running in person campaigns. So I'm a little less active and then I'm back really active. So My next big thing that I'll be doing probably mid-October is I'm going to start Ironman training,
Mm,
and that's going to be done kind of as a fundraiser for the charity.
cool.
So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Love this. Thank you again, Brandon, for coming on and telling your story and just all of your words of wisdom and bits of advice for those that might be new to starting their nonprofit because it was influenced by their own story or those kind of thinking about it. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to do another shameless plug to just engage in this content in some way. We talked a little bit about social media. Look, I don't make the rules up. It's just how it goes. If the more you engage and interact, it makes our content more searchable for other people that might find this conversation and other conversations compelling or useful to help their nonprofits just operate a little bit, easier. That's ultimately what we started this to do. So thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye. That's all we have for you today. Once again, I'm Tosha Anderson with the Charity CFO, and this is a Modern Nonprofit Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to a Modern Nonprofit Podcast on all major streaming platforms so you will stay notified for when the latest episode drops, which will help you stay in the know about anything nonprofit related. Also, join our community on Facebook by searching for a Modern Nonprofit Podcast and follow us on all of our social media accounts. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.